We have some big news in the battle to end the NFA's restrictions on suppressors. The recent decision by the Fifth Circuit protecting the NFA's restrictions is now heading for re-review, and this all comes after the Trump DOJ recently changed positions on suppressors, and they actually found that these are protected arms under the Second Amendment. And now the Trump DOJ may also be shifting positions once again on maybe some of these other topics. So let's break down what is now happening. Now, before we jump into this video, I want to thank one of the main supporters of this channel, which is 1st Phorm. You guys know that 1st Phorm is an amazing company. They're pro-freedom, pro-America. They support the Second Amendment and what we talk about here on the channel. Also, their culture is unmatched. You know, it bleeds into everything that they do, including their products. They have amazing products. I really enjoy their protein powder and their pre-workout. And so I highly recommend that if you guys are interested and you want to support the channel and get great supplements and apparel and all that, if you're looking for that, check them out using the links down below in the detail section, also in the pinned comment. And if you order something $100 or more, you can get free shipping on that order. And also they have a money back guarantee. So if you don't absolutely love what you order, you can get your money back. And again, if you want to support the channel and support a company that supports us here, check them out using the links down below. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a suppressor challenge that was recently ruled on by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. This case is called U.S. versus Peterson, and it deals with the constitutionality of the NFA as it applies to suppressors. Mr. Peterson challenged his conviction of violating the NFA based on a theory that the NFA and its suppressor restrictions do in fact violate the Second Amendment. And on review of this case, the Fifth Circuit 3-judge panel found that suppressors are not arms, and they also found that they do not trigger 2A protections. However, the Trump DOJ through Pam Bondi stated recently in a brief to the Fifth Circuit en banc panel that suppressors are arms and that they've changed their policy on that issue and that they cannot be outright banned. At the same time, they argued that they still believe the NFA's restrictions do not amount to an outright ban on these items, and therefore it's still consistent with the Second Amendment. The Fifth Circuit en banc panel at that time ended up mooting the petition, and then the original 3-judge panel that issued their prior ruling decided to withdraw their opinion and then issue a new decision in this case. They recently issued a new ruling on this case, and once again, they still upheld the NFA's restrictions on suppressors, finding still that they do not trigger full 2A protections. They had to concede that and accept essentially that suppressors are arms, but they still believe that the NFA's restrictions does not amount to a Second Amendment violation. They believed, and they essentially argued, that under Bruin, the NFA operates as a shall issue permit scheme, and therefore it's permissible. That, of course, is a shocking development and very concerning, and especially concerning coming out of a decision of the Fifth Circuit where they tend to be pretty pro 2A. And so this has broad-reaching implications, potentially to leak into other circuit courts who maybe would try to follow that same line of logic. However, now this case is heading back to the en banc panel in the Fifth Circuit, and multiple 2A organizations have joined in support of this case. And recently, the Trump DOJ submitted a request for an extension of time in this case to file the response to the petition en banc. And they also requested that additional time so that they can consult the administration to see essentially how they want to go forward in this case, what position are they going to take, and maybe what arguments are they going to present to the en banc panel. This is interesting because it could signal, once again, another position shift on this issue of suppressors, and that could be a good thing, or maybe it could be, once again, a bad thing. Now, for those not aware, this case arises out of an issue in 2022 where both federal and law enforcement officers in the state of Louisiana executed warrants at Mr. Peterson's home in Louisiana, and he had a home-based FFL, and the police officers there and the ATF there engaged in a search warrant, and they searched his home and his business, and they said it was based on issues with Mr. Peterson's operation of that gun store, and they said that there was potentially some straw purchases that came out of that gun store, some improper record keeping, failure to essentially complete some records and forward them to the ATF. And then they also believed that there were some products that were sold at that location that later arrived and showed up at some crime scenes. But out of this entire incident and all of these searches, it's the possession of a single solvent trap that was in his bedroom safe that really led to these charges. Now, in response to that, and in response to those charges, Mr. Peterson filed a motion to dismiss those charges against him based on the solvent trap. However, on review, the district court denied that motion to dismiss. The court there believed that suppressors are not protected arms, so the 2A arguments failed. Mr. Peterson then appealed to the Fifth Circuit for a reversal, and on original review, the Fifth Circuit 3-judge panel sided with the Biden ATF and the Biden DOJ. Mr. Peterson and his counsel filed for a rehearing en banc in the Fifth Circuit, but like I mentioned, that petition was later pulled, and the original ruling of the three-judge panel was removed because the Trump DOJ shifted positions on suppressors. Well, even after all of that, the three-judge panel on re-review of this case still upheld the NFA's restrictions in their recent ruling. But despite both sides saying that they're protected arms and the Fifth Circuit kind of accepting that in this decision, they still ruled that the NFA can regulate these items since this process operates as a shall issue permit, which they believe is permissible under Bruin. That is why this ruling is so concerning. They use dicta in Bruin about shall issue concealed carry permits in those type of structures and schemes to potentially also allow and make permissible any state restriction or any federal restriction on, any firearm or any arm. And they said that as long as it operates as shall issue and potentially objective, it is permissible under the Second Amendment. However, that ruling is now being challenged, and a petition for rehearing en banc in the Fifth Circuit was filed. In that, Mr. Peterson argues that the panel mischaracterized how the NFA actually operates. He argues that the panel wrongfully equated the NFA's taxation and registration scheme for, suppressors. They said that it operates shall issue, but that really it does not operate as a shall issue CCW permit. How shall issue CCW permits operates is completely different than a taxation and registration scheme at a federal level. They also argue that the panel incorrectly treated the NFA's $200 tax as if it was a routine licensing fee instead of an actual tax. We all know that this is a federal tax. It's based on the federal tax code, but they tried to treat this as simply a fee that someone would pay for something like a CCW permit. Finally, they argue that the panel's reasoning is so broad that it could justify taxation and registration on essentially any firearm, any protected arm, other items like suppressors, and really anything else that a federal government or a state government wants to restrict. Now, also in support of this en banc petition, you had an amicus brief filed by the NRA and the ASA, and in that they argue that the panel's decision sets a perilous precedent by upholding the registration requirements for suppressors while assuming they are protected arms. The logical extension of that decision is that the government may require the registration of all arms and without needing to satisfy the Supreme Court's test for the Second Amendment challenges. So that's the horrible decision that was issued by the three-judge panel here in the Fifth Circuit, and like I mentioned, now this is heading for en banc panel review. The Fifth Circuit en banc panel recently ordered for the federal government to respond to this petition, and that was due on September 22nd, but the Trump administration recently received an extension of time, and so now their response is going to be due on October 6th. However, in that federal government request for the extension, it's also interesting that they indicated that they would be consulting once again with the DOJ and the administration at large to essentially determine the government's position in this case going forward. So in that request for an extension of time, they state that the government requests an additional 14 days to file its response in this matter. This would allow an opportunity to fully address the issues and, if needed, time to consult with the Department of Justice considering the government's position. So the response is now due on October 6th, and it's also interesting, like I mentioned, because there you had an indication from the administration and the federal government here that they are going to be consulting with the DOJ and probably the administration at large once again to determine what is their position in this case now that it's once again reached the en banc panel level. This will likely be granted en banc panel review, which is good because we've received some solid wins out of the en banc panel in the Fifth Circuit. But now we're going to be keeping our eyes on the DOJ's October 6th response to see if once again they shift positions on suppressors. Are they going to do something different? Are they going to shock us once again like they did when suddenly they said suppressors are protected arms? So we're going to be keeping our eyes on this as it develops, and as we get more information, I will let you guys know. If you'd like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is to subscribe to the channel. Also, you can check out my website, armscholar.com. Over there, we have a lot for you guys, deals, coupons, the free legal guide, and a lot of other things for you guys to check out as well. But as always, thank you guys so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.